Hello and welcome. This is something new and experimental. Way back when I first started doing Let's Plays, the plan was to review each and every game I LP'd, but with time that kind of fell apart. So instead I'm doing this. I go through a series and give sort of quick and concise opinions on each game, not diving into the level of detail of a full review, or even giving a number at the end. I'm not going through an entire series, because it might have gone through heavy transformations or certain games I just can't get access to. I try to quickly sum up my opinions while deciding at the end whether I would recommend the game to other people. And this starting segment, along with introducing how this is going to work, is also to give my personal history with the series. And when it comes to Prince of Persia, way back when I remember playing the original Prince of Persia, the realistic 2D side-scroller. I never beat it. In fact, I only really played one level, or at least I only remember playing one level, and I just kept dying to the same traps over and over again. I think it was on my older brother's computer at the time. Anyway, after that, I didn't touch anything Prince of Persia related, except for the reboot, which at the time I really enjoyed. At the time. And then years later, I bought a bunch of Prince of Persia games during a sale and I tried LPing the Sands of Time. I didn't make much progress and I was honestly pretty bad at it. And yeah, that's my history with the series. It was never super impactful on my life and it was more just kind of glances and little spurts of fun throughout my interactions with it. Anyway, let's begin. Let me start by saying I can see why this was considered a classic. The platforming is very enjoyable, but the combat leaves much to be desired and quickly feels like an annoyance that you just want to get out of the way to get back to the platforming. It's not the worst combat in the world, but it's far from the best. Its story had good ideas behind it, but it felt kind of awkward in execution. Like, I never really bought the romance between the prince and Farah, and their interactions never really resonated all that well. But there are moments throughout it that are believable and that enhance the story experience overall. I've played plenty of platformers in my day, and I never really appreciated the sort of ingeniousness behind the reversing time to get rid of a mistake mechanic. Because one of the biggest problems behind platformers, I feel, is properly punishing the player's failure. Some do it by giving you lives, and then after you've fallen/failed a certain amount of times, you've returned to the beginning of the level. Others are super punishing and bringing you back to the last time you saved, or a very early checkpoint when you fail or fall just once. Or you get stuff like the 2008 Reboot or Uncharted, where there isn't any real punishment at all for failure. Whereas in Prince of Persia, reversing time basically acts as your lives. In a very quick, smooth manner, you have X number of times to go back and undo a mistake before continuing. And you get more leniency depending on how many collectibles and extra things you went for, allowing you to make mistakes without getting punished too hard while still providing a punishment for failing too much. I feel it achieves a unique balance in terms of punishing the player when platforming. Visually, its age shows. In fact, on PC I had to turn fog off because the fog made it so I couldn't see anything at all. It was just broken. And I can't really say whether it was good for its time either, because I'm unaware of what the standard at the time of its release was. Or at least I can't vividly remember it. But it still looks fine, it's presentable, you can perfectly tell what everything is supposed to be, and it is fun with old cloth physics on characters and drapes and such. I can honestly recommend this game to anyone who enjoys a good platformer with a decent but far from perfect story. Like, the combat can be an issue, but overall the platforming and the good parts of the story outshine it. Well, it outshines its downsides. The place where this game shines is its platforming. The water stopping mechanic added a fun extra level of depth to the platforming itself. It's just complicated enough while still remaining simple enough to easily grasp, which honestly made for really rewarding platforming. Even if the physics don't really make sense and it can be a little slow, I still found it really enjoyable. It kept throwing in new elements to the platforming, which kept adding to it, making it more unique and interesting as it went on. It's probably some of the most technical and timing-focused platforming I've experienced. There was one moment that I felt was a waste, though. At one moment in the story, a lady character who has been helping you tells you a line about seeing a place as it was in the past before giving you a new power. I got excited at the idea of literally jumping through time, seeing an area transform between its broken old state and its brand new shiny state. But instead, just random broken platforms would appear when you press a button. It feels like a largely let down opportunity and made it just feel like a simpler version of the water stopping mechanic they already had going on. Anyway, that aside, I feel that its platforming is very good and enjoyable. Its combat, on the other hand, is kind of bland. It tries to be flashy and it gets the job done, and it's better than the first game, but when your combat can be won by just smashing one attack button, something is wrong there. I'm not sure if I recorded it, but there's a moment near the end where I'm supposed to cut through a sea of enemies, but because I got so tired of mashing square, I said fuck it and just rolled through them to continue my progress. Now, the weakest point I feel is the story. I didn't care about anything. The brother is bland and a lot of plot points just feel contrived and forced, even when they try to get you to care about this old epic city and the people of the lady. It's just her telling you everything via giant exposition dump, and all the ruins you go through are just brown and dull looking. Ruins can still be interesting and colorful while still being ruins. Now, visually, the game is nothing to write home about, but it's not bad. It looks good for the most part, except the prince himself. Everything else looks fine, just the prince. He looks fucking weird. I can't quite put my finger on it exactly. Maybe it's his chin, it might be his facial hair, I don't know. He just looks really weird to me. The world and the areas look fine, nothing amazing, but they still look fine. But he looks weird. That's all I can say is he looks weird. Moving on. So the important part, the platforming for the most part, is beautifully done, but everything surrounding it is rather dull and uninteresting, and it is incredibly short, so I honestly can't recommend this title. Because as much fun as the platforming was for me, because of its more technical and timing approach, not everyone is going to enjoy it. The immediate difference between this game and the others is the tone. It's extremely out of place. We went from mystical Arabian, Persian themes and music to heavy metal and horror themes. The only thing close in terms of tone was the prison level in Sands of Time, which even then felt out of place in Sands of Time. The game is also pretty sexist. It's obvious they tried to do the horny teenager dream angle. All the girls are either showing a ton of skin in something skin tight or in high heels, and the average generic female character you fight throughout the game all talk like they want to fuck the prince before they kill him, up until you hurt them too much, and then they just sound scared and like they want to compromise, and it's just... Now don't get me wrong, I enjoy lovely naked ladies as much as the next guy, or half-naked ladies, but this just feels kind of gross and unfair. At least in Sands of Time and the Two Thrones, you're running around as a shirtless guy to be fair to the ladies, and their costumes make some semblance of sense because of belly dancers being a thing, and they aren't acting like they want to fuck you the entire time you fight, whereas with Warrior Within, or in Warrior Within, it's all just... too far. Despite its dumb, forced edginess and its horny teenager themes, I found Warrior Within to have a really great story. It has its problems, but it was still enjoyable in general with interesting twists and turns. One moment where the horror tone came in well was with the Dahaka. It was actually a little thrilling to run away from this thing. One moment you're jumping around, next you know it pops around the corner, its music kicks in, and your screen goes a sepia tone filter, causing you to just want to run. True, it would have been better if the theme wasn't just a heavy metal guitar track and something actually scary or eerie, but it still evoked a response of, oh shit, from me nonetheless. In terms of gameplay, its combat is very fun. It could be hectic, but it was very satisfying and bombastic. It gives you different opportunities and methods to take out opponents, needing you to approach different opponents in different ways. With the variety of attacks and enemies, the combat was quickly engaging and caught my interest. When it comes to its platforming, on the other hand, it's basically the same as Sands of Time, just with a few bells and whistles added on. And by bells and whistles, I mean ropes and banisters. Its platforming is nothing special or outstanding. It's on par with Sands of Time, so they didn't really evolve it in any meaningful way. Another problem, apart from the weird tone and the underlying sexism, is it can be tedious. It punishes you way too much when you do fail, making you replay minutes worth of gameplay for one missed jump, or a mini-boss at the end of a section giving you trouble. And the mini-bosses will give you trouble. This game is difficult. Plus, a lot of the game has you rerunning through the same sections over again, which mainly serves as padding. In fact, it can get so tedious when you mess up or are having trouble, I nearly just said fuck it and dropped the game a few hours in because I was tired of wasting time doing the same jumps. I honestly am not sure whether to recommend this. It keeps the good platforming of Sands of Time and greatly improves upon the combat while having a good story. Just the tedium that can come of it and the super out of place tone and the sexist themes are all a real deterrent. I say check it out, but don't feel bad if you decide to quit halfway through. I'll start by saying two things. 1. The game time I'm unsure of because I accidentally left the game running at one point in the background, so it's probably a few hours shorter than my Steam game time, which is currently at about 9 hours. And 2. Prince of Persia: The Two Thrones is definitely the best of the old trilogy. Visually, it's not the best though. Its character models leave a bit to be desired, they feel a little off, they don't move quite right, but when it comes to the environments, most of them look great and it's got a great amount of variety throughout the game. The main problem in the visual department is the camera. It feels claustrophobic, it feels like it always wants to be just a little too close to your character, both in gameplay and in cutscenes. But at least it's the first in the old trilogy I can play in widescreen. That may be the cause of why the top and bottom during most cutscenes feels cut off, due to the laziness on the devs' part. The Two Thrones has the most fleshed out story of the old trilogy. This was the first time I got a real true feel for the prince and what kind of character he is, and I really enjoyed his character, and his interactions with the others in the story. The story overall was really well done, and I generally enjoyed almost every moment of it, and it does a good job at wrapping up and giving a good conclusion to a trilogy. The gameplay is also on point. It has the great combat from Warrior Within, and it does plenty to revitalize and evolve the platforming from previous entries. One of the main things it added though were speed kills, or basically stealth kills. Instead of fighting your way through everything, enemy encounters become little platforming puzzles, scanning the environment and finding the right spot and time to strike and speed kill as many opponents as possible, without alarming said opponents. The speed kill mechanic of queuing an animation and pressing the attack button at the right time is also used quite a bit in boss fights, making part of the boss fights into platforming challenges instead of just fighting challenges. Figuring out what you have to do to queue a speed kill on your opponent. I should also mention that this has the best boss fights in the entire series that I played. A great way they broke up the gameplay, making sure it never felt stale, was via chariot sections, which I felt all controlled well enough, and were a nice change of pace from the sneaking, jumping, and stabbing that was primarily going on. I can wholeheartedly recommend this to anyone. Despite occasional glitches, overall it felt like the definitive Prince of Persia experience, both from a story and a gameplay standpoint. Although you may be a little lost if you don't play the previous titles, and its conclusion won't be as satisfying if you haven't gone through the whole trilogy. I'd actually played this game years ago, and I remember it fondly, but revisiting it with a critical eye and the experiences the other games had given me, I realized just how much this game fell short, and I feel the best place to start is its gameplay. The platforming is solid, it's satisfying and has a nice flow to it, although it does suffer from the magnet effect sometimes, where you're supposed to answer certain jumps in certain ways, but if you decide to go off the main pathway or the beaten track, your character will snap back into place if you're even remotely close. And this is the first Prince of Persia in a fully open world. True, the open world is just a bunch of different little sections connected via a series of hallways, but the player still has the choice to tackle things in whichever order they choose. Along with this, it seems the developers took a note from Banjo-Kazooie, and Rareware in general. After you beat/purify an area, you need to go through it again in its more lively and colorful state, collecting a bunch of light seeds in order to progress further and deeper into more areas. In terms of combat, this is probably the worst out of all the games up to this point. It tried to focus more on one-on-one combat, and almost every button apart from your block button have become different attacks. But combat quickly boils down to just finding the longest combo you can and abusing it like crazy, while avoiding the occasional quick time event the combat throws at you, or your enemy will transform, and that transformation can only be undone by hitting them with a specific type of attack. It's also the least punishing. They completely got rid of the reversing time mechanic. Instead, your companion Elika just saves your ass, even if it makes no sense from a narrative perspective. She'll always save you from a fall or an enemy, making it so falling or dying feels meaningless. Visually, the game has great design, but it's weird in its execution. Like, all the characters feel and seem like they would look great on paper and when drawn, but their models feel off and even a bit ugly sometimes. Like, a lot of the villains seem like their designs should look great, but they all have this gross, bumpy effect on them and their clothes, which just makes them ugly, despite their core design seeing above par. The environments look great, but each of the 4 main parts is sort of one note. Once you enter the first part of an area, you've pretty much seen the entire area. Now for its story, I feel it's tacked on after the fact, and because of the open-worldedness, you never feel any progress. Almost every area where there is supposed to be an arc of progress in their character, they always walk away from the area feeling the same as when they started because it's kind of required so the player can tackle any area in any order. It makes for an incredibly dull story because no progress is ever made. And in general, there is a giant disconnect between the story and the gameplay. You'll go to areas where Elika will say stuff like, "I had so much fun here as a kid," or "the people used to do blank here." And you just see these massive holes in the ground, and the fact that almost everything is balancing on the tiniest pillars way up in the air, and it quickly becomes incredibly unbelievable that anything lived here anywhere near this point in time, unless everyone just came out of their mamas free running. Plus, in general, with her powers and the powers you unlock, everything is just filled with plot holes and feels incredibly disconnected from the gameplay itself. And the ending is pretty bad, dumb, and forced. Ultimately, looking back on this game, I feel it has a lot of potential if it was done right, but they fell short at almost every point outside of the platforming. In one specific example, there's a button you can press to talk to Elika, which at first sounds neat and like a cool little idea. Keep the characters talking and learning more about everything while platforming if the player chooses to do so. But the only way the talking works is if you stop everything and have the characters stare and talk at each other for a couple lines of dialogue. It ends up just becoming annoying if you want to learn more, making it so as it went on, I just ignored Elika and the new dialogue icon on the bottom left corner, because I got tired of just stopping everything just to be told exposition. Despite that, I would recommend this to anyone who enjoys a good platformer, even if the only bright side to this is its platforming. It's just that almost all of its downsides, while not at all good, are all generally inoffensive, and none of them will destroy your gameplay experience. Alright, so here we are, the final segment. Now for this I will answer 3 questions, one of which is very simple. Am I glad I played it? Yes, I am. And for the second question, am I sad it's gone? Or at least that a new mainstream title hasn't seen the light of day in about 6 years now? And I'm gonna have to say yeah. Playing through all these makes me kinda sad that it got replaced with Assassin's Creed for Ubisoft. I mean, I've enjoyed Assassin's Creed, but my experiences with both franchises has been vastly different, and they give extremely different vibes and feels. And at their core, they're just way too different for one to be a replacement for the other. So I can say I am saddened by the fact that it is considered dead for the most part, especially when they have a publisher like Ubisoft, which tries to pump out a lot of games on an annual basis. Now that I answered those 2, it's time for the most loaded question and the most fun part for me. If I were to reboot or bring new life to the series, how would I go about doing so? First of all, we wouldn't redo or reboot the Sands of Time trilogy. That's done and over with, and it stands fine on its own, and it doesn't need to be redone or rebooted in any way. We do a continuation. But before I talk about the story, let's talk about gameplay and visuals. In terms of gameplay, we'd bring back the combat from the Two Thrones and Warrior Within. Maybe tweaking a little here and there, and giving a larger variety of enemies to encounter, and just generally smoothing it all out. In terms of platforming, we'd take notes from the Forgotten Sands and the Reboot, focusing on what made the platforming smooth, enjoyable, and challenging all at the same time. And we'd of course bring back the reversing time to get rid of a mistake mechanic because it works too well as a system of punishment for the player. Now visually we'd go a bit different. We'd go a bit more cartoony with a cel-shaded style, focusing more on designs and cloth physics because it's always been sort of at the core of the Prince of Persia games, making it so cloth in this game is generally really well animated, moves smoothly, and is everywhere, while having that simpler cel-shaded style so the game wouldn't tax the current systems or computers too much when active. Of course, I by no means think of it as everyone being chibi characters or something like that. That'd be ridiculous. They look a lot like designs from the Two Thrones, Sands of Time, and the Reboot, just without too much worry about detailed textures or being realistic. Now for the heaviest bit, the story. We'd play as the son of the old prince. Now this prince will be generally selfish, but with a decent moral compass and who isn't afraid to joke around with or mock those he encounters. As for the story that would happen, we take notes from the reboot, which I know sounds silly at first, but just hear me out. The prince was being kind of dragged to another battle by his father, because, Persian Empire. His father would try his best to say, it's for your own good, and that he'll need to know this stuff when he eventually takes over, blah, 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 blah. But the player wouldn't see any of this. What the player would see would be after a mysterious sandstorm hit. He'd be lost and confused wandering the sandstorm. He would have covered his face with the cape he was wearing, and, he'd make it into a cloak with like an Arabian-style head dress thing, until he eventually trips and falls into a valley. In this gigantic valley, it would be a beautiful oasis and a giant kingdom. He'd be falling for a little while, admiring it, before he realizes that he's falling to his death, and then he stops himself by stabbing his blade into the valley wall. He'd stop for the most part, but his blade would break in two near the end and he'd fall hard, but he'd still be okay. Now, not to spend too much time on this, the kingdom in the valley would be pretty vast, and it would have been corrupted by the sands of time. Kalina would have escaped to this kingdom to escape, the world, which could only be accessed if the sandstorms of the desert allowed you in. One other major powerful being found their way into the kingdom in secret, a djinn, or a genie. He's manipulative and he contorts people's wishes to normally end in tragedy. He found people discontent with following Kalina and granted their wishes. A courtesan who felt it was unfair that she was stuck in her current place in life, whereas the queen was a powerful spirit of the sands that controlled everything. Jealousy drove her wish, and she gained control of the higher, richer districts. Everyone hypnotized by her and her new powers. Everyone essentially being a zombie. And a lot of people are now dead in the streets who she wasn't too fond of, and she's enjoying doing whatever the fuck she wants now. The next wish was by a religious leader. A religious leader who wanted everyone to follow his faith, and who wanted the queen, who didn't make sense to his faith, to be cursed. Kylina found herself being ill after this wish. Not enough to kill her, but she started to feel weak. He drives a large amount of people in the slums. They wander the streets rambling about the graciousness of their god Ormazd, attacking anyone who even remotely suggests that their faith is in fact. Powerful inquisitors wander the slum streets during the church hours and kill anyone who isn't attending. The next wish was by a guard who wanted power. He wanted to be a general, not a royal guard. Power to crush whomever gets in his way. The battle armaments, armory, and barracks are his domain. He killed almost everything in there himself, or everyone. He got bigger and stronger the more he killed. Now he wanders around his domain, making sure there's nothing left to challenge him. And the final wish was a lost king who wanted a kingdom again. He played the part, and he even convinced himself for a long time that he was happy just helping Kylina. But the djinn worked his way into his heart, and deep down he found the king wanted to rule once more. The king wished for the kingdom to be his, and for Kylina to be gone. The djinn granted the wish of the kingdom being his, but could not simply make Kylina disappear. The djinn then gathered them, had them work together, agreeing that the king would rule the kingdom, the religious leader would help the common man in the slums, the courtesan would run the wealthier districts to her heart's content, and the guard would be the general and main power for the kingdom. Together they used their newly formed abilities and killed Kylina with a sword given to them by the djinn, something that would contain her essence. But it just captured some of her essence, and caused the entire kingdom's people to get corrupted and contorted by the out-of-control sands. The djinn's magic keeping his champion's desires intact, but at heart each of them are truly lost to the sands. So they're, they still want what they want, but that's all that there is to them. They're, twisted by both the sands and the djinn's magic, making them just unique beasts and monsters. And that's where our hero comes in. You'd start with a stealth focus until the hero finds the sword in an important looking altar in the newly renovated slums. The prince would be surprised to see another regular person as this occurred, a young girl, who seems also to be dressed in royal clothing, who goes for the sword too. She would end up being his companion as he goes through killing the champions and people contorted by the sands. And she would be a big source of information for what's going on here, and they would just talk as you do the platforming. The way she was spared, or, the way she's fine, was she actually has magic herself, and she was able to protect herself. She was a newly formed being of magic in the world that Kylena guided to her kingdom to help teach her about controlling powers and the dangers of the world at large. So using Kylena's time powers from the sword and the young girl's powers, they'll slowly reverse time in each section of the kingdom in order to restore the kingdom to how it was before all of this went down, cutting down the ones who made their wishes before they collected together and killed Kylena. So you'd fight through a section, take the sands out of the guy, reverse time, and then you'd fight them when they were more human, and kill them before they can do anything. Each time they restore a section, the sand would come around the prince and collect into the sword and give him a new power. And the main section that would have a different feel or play differently would be the guard's domain. That would take notes from the Dahaka, and be more about running from this monster destroying things behind you as you run for your life. And a lot of hiding and stealth, and when you think it's lost you, he would pop around the corner and make you run once again. And this whole adventure would end with the girl enchanting the sword with all the power she can, and the prince finds and stabs the djinn with it. But of course, the prince will be tempted with a wish. The djinn would act as someone incredibly accommodating, saying that he didn't wish for the tragedy to occur, he just wanted to make people's dreams come true. After all, it is what the king wished. Of course, it's a load of bull, and it'll be up to the player to make a wish and try to fight whatever tragedy would follow, or just stab the djinn with the enchanted sword, making it consume his essence to the djinn's surprise, and releasing Kylena at the same time, which would also create a very powerful weapon and artifact that he would bring back home to his father with this new, fantastic tale. And as the prince talks more with and becomes more comfortable with the girl, he'd mimic the first game and discard whatever clothing gets too ripped or tattered as the fight goes on. So his cloak and mask thing would be the first to go. And it would happen as he emotionally opens up as well. So it's kind of figurative and literal opening up throughout the story. And yeah, that sort of sums up what the story would be. I realize some things probably don't make that much sense in terms of canon, but things could easily be tweaked or retconned, like the reboot would be retconned entirely. And yeah, that's how I do a reboot. The story I mentioned, focusing on the combat from Warrior Within and the Two Thrones, platforming from the Forgotten Sands and the reboot, and all of it would go into a combination of what I think would be pretty enjoyable. And yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'd like to hear what you guys generally think about this and what series you'd like me to do next. Bye.